Sue Ellen's on Zoom.
Yeah.
We are live on YouTube.
We are live on YouTube. Hey, we're at 1:01 p.m., so I will call this meeting to order, and I'd like to start by acknowledging with gratitude that we live and work on the traditional unceded territory of the Squamish Nation. These people have been stewards of these lands and waters surrounding the Quel'Tha Bowen Island. Welcome to the Bowen Island Municipality for January 8th, 2024, our first meeting of the year. Everyone back and refreshed and ready to take the business of governance in the most exciting way possible. I'm Andrew Leonard. I'm the mayor of Bowen Island Municipality and the chair of this meeting. I'd like to introduce the other elected members of Bowen Island's council that are here this afternoon, starting with on my far left, we have Councillor John Saunders. To his right is Councillor Tim Wake. To my right is Councillor and Islands Trustee Judy Getty. And due to the weather, we have a couple of council members joining online this afternoon. Just going in the order that I see them on my screen, we have Councillor Sue Ellen Fast, also Islands Trustee Sue Ellen Fast, and
Hello.
Councillor Alison Morse. We're also joined by several members of our professional staff team. To my right is our Chief Administrative Officer, Liam Edwards. To my left is our Corporate Officer, Sophie Idsigna, as well as our CFO, Kristen Watson, and other members of our team who may be presenting agenda items here. This meeting is being recorded, and when members of the public speak during the public comment and question and answer portion of the meeting, your presence and voice will be included in the permanent recording, which will be available at bowenislandmunicipality.ca, as well as our YouTube channel for posterity. This council meeting is an official forum for the conducting of the business of local government. We are all passionate about our community. We are all passionate about what happens here, and I'd encourage everyone to maintain a constructive and respectful tone during the meeting and to direct any comments to council during the public comment or question and answer portion of the meeting to myself. For those that are online or are following along in the room, the agenda and full council package for this afternoon's meeting can be found at bowenislandmunicipality.ca. And with that, I will look to the corporate officer for the addition of any late items to the agenda.
Yes, there were several items in the on-table package. Item 6.2A, a letter regarding the OCP terms of reference. Item 7.2A, Voidus Peterson, a letter regarding the Snug Cove sewer outfall replacement. And 8.2B, there were several letters from the public regarding short-term rentals.
Thank you very much. And with that, I will look for a motion that council approve the agenda and on-table items for the January 8th, 2024 meeting. Moved by Councillor Saunders, seconded by Councillor Wake. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
That carries unanimously. Oh, and Councillor Alex Jurgensen has joined us online as well. Good to have you here, Councillor Jurgensen.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 2, public comments. I will look to the corporate officer for public comments.
We have 6 today.
6 public comments today. So we will give each commenter 2 minutes and 15 seconds. So for folks that are in the room and online, you'll have 2 minutes and 15 seconds to appear before council, where you can let us know your take on any particular issue. You'll hear an alarm go off at 2 minutes. So at 2 minutes, you've got 15 seconds to really wrap up and drive your message to council home. And with that, I will look to the first speaker.
Our first speaker today is Dane Thompson, and he is on Zoom.
Mr. Thompson, are you with us today?
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm actually going to speak on behalf of JQB and myself. I won't take even 2 minutes. We are grateful for the opportunity to speak to council. We are the owners of 1104 and 1108 Foxglove Lane, and we're just reaching out for some clarification regarding the potential of the impact of item on this agenda 4.9 and 7.2, and Patrick Graham's report as well. In his report, he referenced us as the owners on Foxglove Lane directly. So therefore, we're seeking some understanding on how these agenda items with that information presented in his report affects us as property owners on Foxglove Lane. We're seeking any information on any potential implications, changes, or developments that these agenda items may bring about concerning our properties Additionally, we just want some clarification on one last thing publicly, whether these incidences, including the outflow pipe break or any subsequent damage to the outflow pipe or anything, has been reported to the province as required on our permit for the Snug Cove Sewer System and the relevant legislation that presides over it. Was it reported, as it's a vital concern to us all? And this is all we wanted to know, and hopefully we see this addressed in this council meeting. And thank you for letting me speak.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Thompson. The report that you referenced is in the consent agenda. However, I will turn it over to staff to make any initial comments. And I think probably from there, the most appropriate course of action would be for staff to reach out to you directly. If that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I can't speak to the relevant request and the associated reports at this point, but we can look into that and respond directly.
Okay. So we'll leave that with staff, Mr. Thompson. If you don't get a response or you feel you need more information, Mayor and Council is always available to you by email, and feel free to reach out as well. But I'll leave you to connect with staff for now.
Wonderful. We'll connect with staff. Thank you ever so much. And thank you, Liam, as well. Thank you.
Welcome.
Next, we have Ellen Hayakawa.
Ms. Hayakawa, thank you for being here.
Hi. Thanks for having me. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council, and Happy New Year. 27 years ago, I chose to move to the West Coast to reclaim my family's heritage. And lucky and blessed of me, I got to live here on Netleyla home. Feel really blessed. I'm a third generation Canadian of Japanese ancestry and a descendant of parents and grandparents who during World War II were forcibly removed from their homes in Vancouver by the government and incarcerated in Slocan City and Sandon. They were told by the government to go to Japan after the war or moved east of the Rockies. They ended up in Toronto. I've been researching and recording stories of those Canadians of Japanese ancestry who lived, worked, were born, played, and went to school on this island. As part of repairing the fabric and foundations of this island, I believe that their stories need to be told, and acts such as the restoration of the bridge at Bridal Veil Falls needs to be considered, which I spoke about in my letter. Through cooperation and collaboration, much healing can occur for everyone who participates. It's important that children in our schools learn about the violation of citizen rights on this island. Only with awareness and education can every generation hold up that responsibility to ensure that racism and racist policies, including all violations of citizen rights, never happen again. And that we make peace with the past in order to create peace now and into the future. In October, I reached out to Suzanne Tabata, CEO of the Japanese Canadian Legacy Society. She and Linda Kawamoto-Reed, coordinator of BC Heritage Sites, are here today as a delegation. They've been meeting with me and others in our community who represent the organizations that care about history, heritage, and legacy. And collectively, we propose the possibility of restoration of the bridge built by Mr. Daikichi Koga. Thank you very much for consideration of my request in my letter to Mayor and Council to support this project in principle. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next, we have Anne Frank de Parier, and she is on Zoom.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Is that okay?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. So I'm sorry, I'm snowed in, so I cannot attend in person. So your worship and councillors, I'm afraid to say that you will one more time have to listen to my rant about the on-island composting. During the weekend, I was rummaging through my files and I came across the consultant report dated February 2020 by T. Minga and Associates. And that's the one.
Audio now.
And the consultant report pointed out that there is a very high that the high water table is right on the ground level and there's a risk of pollution. And following that, I pointed that out the first time to the council on January 17th, so less than a year ago. So on December 11th, you were presented by the staff report, which I can also show you. And that staff report does not mention any of the warning mentioned on the consultant report, Timenga report, and let alone my January 11th letter. So this is very disheartening. I am competent in the field because I'm a retired professional engineer and geoscientist. My second point is that I attended last Saturday Councillor Getty's open house. It was very well attended, and Louise McIntosh came and gave us a thorough picture of the composting collection and situation on our island and other communities in BC. It is evident that Louise has given tremendous thoughts about this topic and about composting on island and how we can effectively handle the situation. Louise has a robust and tailor-made vision for composting on Bowen Island, and it deserves, and I repeat, it deserves to be explored by the municipality and applied. We are all very proud of our recycling depot, which is now a tourist attraction for many. So I think it's time that we also bring the composting part of recycling to the same level of pride and automatic ability by Bowen Islanders. So I repeat, I encourage you to take Louise McIntosh's advice very seriously and draw on her vast experience and handling of our island green material. Thank you for listening to my rant for the third time.
Thank you very much for your continued passion and desire to show up and articulate your views. It's appreciated.
Murray Atherton.
Mr. Atherton, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Sunny Eagle Cliff, where there's no snow. I'll start off by just making sure that you understand that I do not own and do not own it or am involved in a short-term vacation rental or a bed and breakfast or any money-making entity on this island. But basically, what I want to do, I'm also not part of Tourism Bowen Island anymore. I'm just sort of concerned about the economy. Started out this morning reading the BC Business Economic Outlook for 2024. Picked out this one paragraph. We need to plan and to act for what will likely be limited economic growth in the coming 12 months, says Fiona Famuluk, President and CEO of the BC Chamber of Commerce. This means governments need to focus their efforts on policies and programs that spur innovation, boost productivity, and make it possible for businesses to weather any economic turbulence ahead. So I'm talking about the short-term vacation rental situation. A little bit of history prior to Airbnb, which really didn't come into effect. It became an entity in about 2009. People on this island covered costs. They rented their cottages, family cottages, from basically October to May. And there was a great outflux of people trying to find accommodation for the summer because all the people wanted to use their cabins during the summer. With the Small L Landlord and Tenants Act, very few people would want to do that because you'd never get rid of the tenants. It's tough to get them out. My history is I was chair of the Chamber of Commerce from 2000 until about 2008. In 2001, business was just hanging on. I've been part of the Economic Development Committee, the Tourism Bowen. We have no hotels. The short-term rental program that you're talking about, only 25 properties are affected. Have you checked what their assessed value would be and therefore what kind of rent those 25 properties would have to charge. They would not be affordable as far as I know. The other item that I wanted to address was the MRDT. $50,000 quoted to find a consultant to look at getting the MRDT. You take out what you've done now, you've cut out the year-round rental of short-term vacation rental properties. So they can only rent for 120 days. Now you're talking about cutting out those 25 properties that do get the highest revenue. So basically, the revenues projected earlier were $35,000 would come from MRDT on this island. You've cut out the highest revenue producing entities. So I'm thinking you'll probably be getting about $20,000 a year, split between Birch and Tourism Bowen Island, $10,000. Is that worth a $50,000 consultant's fee? I think probably Jody at Tourism Bowen Island could do an equal job for a lot less money.
Thank you, Mr. Atherton.
Thank you.
Bruce McDonald.
Just a point of information to the staff, perhaps Daniel. What has been the estimate of MRDT revenue in the past, or has staff been able to peg what the revenue would be? Understand that I'm putting you on the spot, and if there's no answer, that's totally okay.
I don't have it off the top of my head.
Thank you.
Mayor, I seem to recall the most recent estimate was somewhere in the order of $90,000.
$90,000.
But that $90,000, but that is not conducted on like exhaustive research or anything.
Okay.
So that's a very rough estimate.
Thank you. Mr. McDonald, welcome.
Hi. All right, I'm here to inquire if council is aware of the Oceans Protection Act. DFO is one of DFO's mandates. And from what I know about the sewage outfall problem, especially the immediate situation, this to me seems like it would qualify for money from that DFO to repair this pipe or and replace it, actually. I just want to know what you guys think about that.
That is a question that I'm sure will come up during the agenda item when we discuss the loan authorization bylaw. So I would anticipate some information on that then. And if there's a further question that comes out of that discussion, I'd encourage you at the end of the meeting, there's a question and answer period where you're able to, the members of the public are able to ask further questions of council.
Well, I'm going to inquire with DFO myself.
Sure.
Because it was me that complained to Ministry of Environment initially last year. So I want to help you guys see a way to solve this quickly, because I was also a resident of the marina last winter. And it's a serious problem. I think I may have, believe I've suffered health effects from being on the water down in the marina. I was liveaboard through the winter.
Audio now.
The whatever it is that's coming out of that pipe at times is very, very apparent, and especially at night when there's no wind. My other concern with the planning for the replacement project is that I don't think that ending the outfall at Dorman Point is sufficient at all. I spent a lot of time in the cove, and I'm familiar with how the water flows in and out of there. And it's difficult to see, for instance, there was a diesel leak this summer, and that diesel remained on the surface for a long time in the inner reaches of the cove. So there's parts of the cove that don't get flushed as often or as well as the outside. The farther in you are, the less that water seems to circulate. And in fact, what ended up happening was the diesel collected there. It took a long time to dissipate. So I have spoken with a guy named Bob, who is Nancy's husband at the grocery store, and he's a diver, and he had something to do, I think, with placing this outfall to start with. Mm-hmm. And he said it should have been an 8-inch pipe to start with. I know that's what you want to go to now, but I think in addition to being 8 inches, this pipe needs to fall into deep water, like 300, 400, 600 feet of water. I don't think you've budgeted enough for it. And I think there's money at DFO to pay for a real surefire solution. I don't think just pumping to Dormant Point is going to be a solution, because if you spend any time in that water between where the ferry comes in and Dormant Point, you're still trapped in currents there, and it can push. I think it could easily push the effluent back into the cove if you end it at Dormant Point. I also believe.
I'm gonna end you there, Mr. McDonald. That is your time.
I also believe that the BC ferries have been.
Mr. McDonald, for the sake of equity for all the speakers who have a set amount of time, I will end it there. There will be an agenda item on this afternoon, and then there'll also be another opportunity at the end of the meeting to ask further questions from the public if you like.
Sure, I do have more to say. So.
Thank you.
Okay.
And that is it for public comments.
Okay, thank you to all of our commenters this afternoon. I will move on to item 3, which is delegations. And this afternoon, for our delegations, at the full names here, we have Suzanne Tapita and Linda Kawamoto Reed, who are joining us from the Japanese Canadian Legacy Society. So feel free to come on up and join us at the table here.
Thank you, Your Worship. Do I stand or do I sit?
You can sit. We're semi-casual here, I guess. So for your delegation, you have 15 minutes. We generally encourage 10 minutes of presentation and then questions afterwards, however it is your time to use.
All right, thank you very much. And if we could maybe keep our presentation a little short and then allow for some robust questions, hopefully to come in from the different stakeholders in the room and perhaps even some of the islanders who are visiting today. So first of all, we thank you very much for inviting us to be on this agenda today. Linda Kawamoto Reed and myself are coming from under the umbrella of the Japanese Canadian Legacies Society. Both of us have decades of experience in volunteer and in working in the Japanese Canadian community, nationally and regionally and provincially. Just to give everybody here a context of why we're here and we're speaking in person rather than sending an email, I think this is a really good time to center the kind of work we're doing and answer any questions that people might have in this room. I've been working on a project for the past 5 years called the BC Redress Project, and it was through the National Association of Japanese Canadians. About a year and a half ago, we achieved some basically unprecedented success with the BC provincial government on a historical wrongs package, which has a monetary value to it, currently sitting in our reserves around $62 million. What this does is it is actually connected to a number of pillar initiatives, whether it's education for post-secondary education, community and culture, seniors health and wellness, heritage in this case, or a monument in Victoria. So we've got a number of initiatives operating under our office. Linda is part of our BC Heritage Sites team. It's a program that we're running in British Columbia where we work with communities, local governments and or organizations to develop heritage sites that have significance to the story of origin for the Japanese Canadian community in BC. And sometimes we're looking at internment centers and places of uprooting and so forth, because what needs to be contextualized is that some time ago, 22,000 persons of Japanese Canadian descent were forcibly uprooted, dispossessed, and dispersed throughout BC, forced east of the Rockies or back to Japan, a country many of them didn't know. So this is bringing it all home by working with communities to do these singular heritage projects, and we're doing 30 different sites in BC. And Ellen had reached out to myself regarding some intergenerational trauma pieces that we're also working on in a wellness program. And then we started talking about Bowen Island. Excuse me, some of the research that we've done indicates that up the Howe Sound, there was an extremely vibrant, thank you, there was extremely vibrant Japanese Canadian community that was working in wood fiber. And even on this island, there's a lot of remnants of Japanese Canadians who have been here and doing work. So we today, as a congregation, which you attended with us, went to the Bridal Veil Falls area on a potential project that we might be interested in supporting to bring that area, that landing area, back to life of what it once used to be. And we have the funds to be able to support such an initiative. We do not do any work as a group without the implicit endorsement of community. We're not trying to plug in things that don't fit with community. But certainly when we met today at the site with your Islands Trust representative, with yourself, with Peter from the Heritage Commission, our Museum and Archives, and with Ellen, it looked as though there was quite a bit of excitement to move forward with such a project. So about 10 minutes ago, we had a letter sent on our letterhead with my signature saying that we validate the process to move forward. And we are officially inviting Bowen Island into this incredible work that we're doing across the province, which is not just in the Lower Mainland area. We're doing some work in the Prince Rupert area up where the Pacific Northern Cannery is, Ocean Falls, different other Gulf Islands, parts of Vancouver Island, and into the farming communities, which we've had an eradication of story completely in that area. And of course, many Japanese Canadians were in the agriculture field, not just the fishing field as well. So we're here to say hello. We want to engage with the community. And so we came physically so that we can begin that engagement process in hopes that we can move forward with a project, understanding and recognizing that there's multiple government layers that the Bowen Island community has to work with Metro Vancouver, et cetera. So that's what I'd like to say. And Linda might want to just add a few words. She is our archival expert on this project. Go ahead, Linda.
Sure. Well, what struck me about the site was how integrated it is with tourism trails, commemoration, the foot traffic that we could see was very promising. And that's one of the things that we endeavor to do in our projects, is to make sure that it fits with the community. It fits with tourism, education, all of those things that the project is hoping to endeavor. So we came away from looking at the site very excited about the prospect, but we also know that there's some work to be done on the site, but we're hoping that those are just minor things. But I don't know, we're not engineers. But we're very excited about the project.
And just to give everyone here who's listening or who cares a sense of the framework, we are on a WIC. We are not going to be a legacy society for ever and ever. I do report quarterly to the province, even though we own our money. We have full agency over this grant program and what we're doing with it. As a matter of transparency, I do report quarterly to the province. I work directly with the Attorney General's Ministry. Our file is with the Attorney General's Ministry under a program called Multicultural and Anti-Racism Branch of the Attorney General. We tend to work also with the Premier's office as well, directly on what we're doing. So I have a full accounting practice that we show our records every 3 months on how we're tracking our spending, et cetera. Very transparent on that piece. But just in terms of timing for projects, this is not sort of a forever and everything. We would want to get moving fairly quickly to at least be able to have a proposal pieces together by March 1st. With Bowen Island coming in a little bit later into the conversation than some of our other conversations, we can talk about that March 1st proposal deadline. But our WIC, our runway for producing our work, certainly is 3 years. And we include a final report wrap up in that 3-year window, or maybe even a few extra months beyond a 3-year window. We do a 50% allocation tranche towards our projects upfront, with a 40% on interim reporting and a final 10 on the final report. Everything that we do, we're going to be passing on to a assessment team within our own Japanese Canadian community, which is comprised of people that understand construction and some levels of engineering, et cetera. And they'll read it to make sure that we're signing off on things that work. So we're in a position to create an agreement and work with whichever local government and or organization. In this case, I think there's a number of stakeholders that are involved in this project. That's basically what we do. Very, very transparent. I mean, there's a juggernaut of people behind me from an accounting perspective, just to make sure we keep everything in line in our reporting. That's it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Questions? Councillor Saunders.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for your presentation. That was enlightening for sure, and thanks for bringing it to us. My only question, you may have sort of answered it, but what exactly beyond support in the sense of we think this is a great idea, go ahead, what more do you need from council, if anything? Like, do you need financial support of any kind? And I guess the next question is, you indicated kind of short time frame for yourselves. If it was necessary to get, the go-ahead from council, as it were, would you be able to present us with something visual that says, here's what we think it'll look like at the end of the day, or anything along those lines?
Yes, we can do that. I think that we have here's what I understand, that there is another municipal piece in this with the Metro Vancouver Parks people. Because what we're thinking about is in an area that has that governance structure over it. And similar to many of the heritage sites that we're developing, there is a layered relationships and stakeholders. But I think what we really want from Mayor and Council is, because you have a municipal government, you have a government, first of all, in this Gulf Island, unlike the others. But we do expect that this is the funnel through which the will of the people of the island sits with the local government. And because of that, I mean, that litmus test of whether this stands to be supported by a community, rejected by a community, or given any level of neutrality, right, from the community, that we look to the local governments to be able to field those responses. So we're not looking for monetary support. We have those pieces, I feel, but we do need to have the legitimacy of a community behind the work that we do. And we cannot, and we will not do anything with all these different communities that we're engaged with, and there's 3 other Gulf Islands, right? We will not do anything without some level of consensus, on a broader public level. I mean, there is this idea of resuscitating and renewing the Japanese Canadian heritage piece, which is why we're here, but it does have to fit with, as Linda mentioned, it has to fit with sort of the lifestyle and the overall improvements that could be made to the island for the sake of islanders that not only live here, but people that visit as well, all wrapped in some kind of strong message to the past of what's happened, and remembering those people who were here in the past. So I think it's the community legitimacy piece is the answer.
Thank you. That's a really thorough and pointed answer. That's great.
Thank you, Councillor Saunders. Councillor Morse?
Thanks. My question sort of falls a little bit onto Councillor Saunders, but I'm just curious, who is actually, I think the project is a great idea and the recognition, and I no problems at all with that. It's more, who is actually going to run the project, put out the tenders, supervise the construction, et cetera, et cetera? Is that your organization or somebody else?
That's a great question. Thank you very much for asking it, and we would have addressed it if I had my guidelines in front of me. It is going to be up to the stakeholder or the recipient to, a recipient of the funds will have to put together the project management piece. We're not doing the project management piece. The recipient of the funds would do that. If we are working with something like a Parks and Rec component of Metro Vancouver, there are a number of persons that are potentially, right, already associated with assessing that piece. And in our projects that we're doing, we're asking for people to use some of the funds that we're contributing to the project for that management piece of the project, if it doesn't come with the municipal piece contribution.
Okay, so sort of a follow-up. So it's land, this would be built on land that the municipality doesn't own. It belongs to Metro Vancouver, being Crippen Regional Park. So is it fair to say you're not expecting us to be the project managers, that you're expecting the Metro Regional Parks to be the project managers, to be the recipients of the funds, and to ensure that the bridge is built?
We don't know yet because we're just having these conversations right now. This is the beginning of it, and I have to be honest with you, Councillor, I have not had a conversation yet with the Metro Van folks, and I think that will become a little bit more clear at that point. We have a number of projects that have these complex relationships between stakeholders, and we're trying to really, really work out how is it best going to be supervised or managed, and under what line item under somebody's budget might that fall, or in some cases in our very, very small communities that we're working on who don't have mayors and councils, you know, who's actually going to take the lead on it, and are they going to take part of the project budget in order to supervise those pieces. But certainly what I can tell you is from what we saw today and for what we're dreaming about doing, there's a level of feasibility, there needs to be risk management all over this, like just very, very sort of standard project management assessment. Early days is my answer, in short.
And March 1st is when you need to know whether we're supportive of this going ahead, or do you need commitment from somebody to actually be the project manager by March 1st?
I think by March 1st, when we entertain proposals, and we're hoping to get a letter of intent faster than that by February 5th from Bowen Island, if they're going to proceed. I think what we're looking for is a detailed proposal that would indicate that there is a lot, like how is this project going to be managed? So what is the project plan? How is it going to be managed? How is it going to be scheduled? What are the key budget components of it? So we're looking at milestones and the price tags with each. What kind of tranches are we estimating over the project, et cetera? Pretty simple stuff.
That's if you've got a large staff to be able to do that. Yeah, okay, so I don't know what we could actually give you today without thinking about the implications and knowing what Metro thinks about the whole thing.
Yes, I understand that.
Thank you, Councillor Morse. Councillor Getty.
I'd be interested in, but it doesn't have to, I'll catch up with you afterwards in terms of the other 3 islands that you're working with, in terms of getting some sort of a support letter from Islands Trust in particular, because they've got partly a heritage mandate as well. So I think that the overall, I don't imagine there'd be any concerns from them in terms of supporting this kind of, any kind of project that would be on any neighborhood. So that's the one thing.
That'd be great if we could take it, take that further.
And I can work with the other trustees and we can figure out something that the executive committee could support and group that together. And I think that with respect to the metro piece, at the very least, I don't foresee that there'd be a lot of difficulty from Bolton supporting this by the community or the heritage groups, but we do have a heritage commission, so I would like to get this referred to that commission so that they can formally put their support behind it. The chair of the commission was there today and the members, so we can assume that there will be strong support from that. But I think it's heritage piece and they advise this council, so I think we need to get a referral to them as soon as possible so that can happen as well. And that could go to Metro to show them that the community is in support in terms of whatever questions they might raise in terms of whether or not this would be supported up in Bowen. And I think that if there was some way of figuring out whether or not it could be a local project management and possibly local builders and the heritage groups and the heritage people that are on the Heritage Commission, that would be ideal. So whether we can work something out with Metro in terms of maybe not having another project for them, but one that the community supports and figure out how to get it completed to everybody's satisfaction sooner rather than later. Really nice combination. I think it's a fabulous idea. I know that looking through the archives, there's some really wonderful pictures and some both of the bridge and of the community and some of the work that the community members were doing at the time before the internment all happened. So I think that increasing the education and the knowledge about that, there's a very strong collaborative kind of community work before the war and before the internment. So I would like to open up those, get more details about that. And I think that this kind of a project with the information panels and everything else would be really, really good for us and good for honoring the history. So it'd be very exciting.
Thank you very much, Councillor.
Thank you, Councillor Getty. Councillor Fast.
Thank you, and thank you to the delegates who, by the way, I can't see, but I can hear you clearly. Thank you for your presentation. I'm also familiar with, I love heritage. I have worked as a heritage interpreter, and this is exciting project ideas. I wonder if anybody spoke to you today about the idea of this being a salmon-bearing creek with a fish hatchery further up. Currently, there's a salmon video camera down at the bottom, and I'm just wondering about the feasibility of doing what would amount to new construction in a riparian zone, sensitive habitat that there's regulations about, including with Department of Fisheries and Oceans around salmon bearing. So I just wanted to make sure you were aware that there's ecological considerations. Something like this would need to be done carefully. I have one question as well. What would this bridge connect to at either end? Did you have a specific location in mind? In which case, well, I'll just stop there. Can you tell me how it would fit in with the trails, or have you thought that far ahead? Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to be very cautious in my response to you. Yes, we are aware of the salmon habitat. We are aware of the environmental and ecological impacts. So this is something that I've learned about, and we're aware of it. We certainly are not going to be doing a project that impacts negatively these habitats. So that is what I can tell you. Today's location scout was really about the landing area of the trail very close to where the original bridge was constructed, which is nothing more than forms and footings that are cement footings currently. And the scope and scale of this right now, I think it's a little bit early to determine what can be done that doesn't negatively impact the environment, but certainly draws back the heritage of that bridge in that area and is able to provide some level of interpretive education at the same time. It could be something towards a platform. I mean, we might be going in that direction, whereas we don't know yet. And I think it's too early to tell. All of that needs to be discussed. It needs to be looked at and it needs to be evaluated.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And just for clarification, before we get into some technical details, I think it's important, if I read the room and the distinction correctly, is the Japanese Canadian Legacy Society is the funding organization.
Correct.
So they've spoken to Museum and Archives, they've spoken to a community member, and they would be looking for a project manager in the form of one of those organizations or community groups or Metro Vancouver to do the actual technical project design and building and whatnot. I say that because it's unusual to have delegations come and say, we are really excited to give you funding for a heritage and legacy project. Right. And I think, we know that the Japanese Canadian heritage, particularly in BC, is so important to the history of Canada and the history of the region, that it's exciting to have you here. And from our standpoint, the process right now, Councillor Fass, is really, okay, well, who can we connect these folks to that can champion this? With that, I'll look to Councillor Jurgensen for the very last question.
Unmute audio. Not so much a question, but just a thank you for your delegation, and really love the project so far as it is at the moment. Thank you.
Mute.
Councillor Tim Wake for the absolute very, very last.
I just very quickly want to echo what my fellow councillors have said, and I think this is a tremendous project. If the funding's there, there should be a way to make it happen. And whatever we need to do in terms of expressing our, once we referred it to committee, we should be able to get something to you.
Oh, that's really great. Thank you. Before the mayor puts his remarks together, I just want you to know that one of our staff team members or one of our team phoned me up as I was driving off the ferry and said, we're going to put Bowen on the front cover of the Bulletin, which is our premier Japanese Canadian publication. It's very respected. It has very far reach into the community. And we're going to use the heritage pictures and some of the photos that we took at the Bridal Veils area to put on the front cover as an aspirational images more than anything, because we're not confirmed as such. So thank you for your support.
Thank you for being here. Just for the sake of time and because there seems to be agreement around the table, I'll just, by unanimous consent, I'll do a motion to refer the video of this delegation and the incoming letter from the Japanese Canadian Legacy Society to the Heritage Commission. Any objection?
Can I add the Parks, Trails, Greenways Advisory Committee?
And the Parks, Trails, Greenways Advisory Committee. Seeing no objection, that passes by unanimous consent. And then also, as the sitting municipal director for Metro Vancouver representing Bowen Island, I will reach out and make contact with Metro Vancouver to your organization and loop in the appropriate stakeholders to get that conversation going. The process from here, we would ultimately expect the letter from your organization, which is being received today, to come to council and we can make a disposition on that in the next meeting or shortly thereafter. So thank you for making the trek to Bowen in our blizzard, and I wish you a safe trip. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the consent agenda. I will look to council for any items that they would like to remove from the consent agenda. Councillor Getty.
4.7 and 4.9.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear what Councillor Getty wanted pulled.
4.7 and 4.9. Any other councillors wishing to remove items from the consent agenda? Seeing none, I'll look for an adoption of a motion to adopt the consent agenda. Moved by Councillor Saunders, seconded by Councillor Getty. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And that carries unanimously. Councillor Getty, item 4.7, the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund, Emergency Support Services. I will look for a very brief conversation and motion on this piece.
Okay. I don't have it in front of me, but when I was reading through the staff report, it looked like in order to what the province wanted in terms of this grant application was for a resolution from council, and that doesn't appear to be what we're actually is the recommendation. So I'm thinking that we need to beef up the recommendation that council or to have a resolution that council supports the staff applying for this grant, that we will manage the funds.
I see that. So the recommendation that I see in 4.7 reads that council supports staff applying for a UBCM grant in the amount of $30,000 to enable the purchase of laptops, volunteer appreciation, and off-island training for volunteers, and is willing to provide overall grant management to receive this funding. Changed?
I'm not sure. I wanted to ask staff, but I don't see them here, so.
That would be sufficient for.
That'll be sufficient? All right. That was my questions.
Councillor Morris?
I was just going to say that's the exact wording we've used for all the other grants and it has been sufficient. It's clear that we're wanting to apply and it's clear that we're going to manage the grant.
So with that, I'll look for unanimous consent, as it seemed to be a clarification. Is there any objection to adopting the recommendation as written?
Move adoption without recommendation.
Okay, and seeing no objection, that passes unanimous consent. 4.9 is draft minutes of the Snug Cove Sewer Local Advisory Committee meeting held November 29th, 2023. Councillor Getty.
In addition to, and what's dealt with later in the agenda is the loan authorization only. And in the minutes, there was a recommendation with respect to maintenance. And it was the second to last paragraph, I believe. That whether or not council should consider a bylaw for the users to provide grease trap records. And if that isn't happening, and that's a problem with that delicate system that is not functioning particularly well, then a recommendation that perhaps the advisory committee or the users amongst themselves, or that this be put as a priority issue or priority item for the staff to get that sorted out. So it's just in limbo at this point as a recommendation, as a mention in the minutes, and I thought that we should pinpoint that.
Right, so maybe I'll refer that through staff. I know that recommendation was part of an update from the Director of Engineering.
Yep.
Did staff want to comment on, in the minutes it says it was advised that the municipality is considering recommending a regulatory bylaw. Is there a timeline on that bylaw or an update on that bylaw?
It is something that we are considering. We don't have a timeline for you.
Okay.
It is definitely on our agenda.
Okay.
To advance. You'd
Okay.
be surprised at what else is not there.
No meetings in 3 years. Okay. Okay, thanks. Clarification.
Okay. If there's further clarification, by all means, connect with staff. Councillor Jurgensen.
Thank you. I just want to ask, kind of in terms of your average end user of the Snug Cove sewer system, what such a regulatory bylaw would kind of mean for an end user, just for clarification.
I'll look to staff to address that comment.
So through the mayor, essentially the bylaw is focusing on more of the commercial operators within the system to ensure that they have appropriate grease traps and other technology to minimize the load impacts on the sewer system itself. It wouldn't have any bearing or implication to residential connections.
Audio now. Perfect. Thank you.
And with that, I'll look for a motion to receive the draft minutes of the Vancouver Sewer Local Advisory Committee, moved by Councillor Getty, seconded by Councillor Wake. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Now
Carries unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to section 6, business arising from minutes. 6.1, a request for direction to take the draft 5-year financial plan to public consultation. We are joined today by our CFO, Chris.
Thank you, Mayor. Through the Mayor to the rest of the council. I just wanted to provide a bit of an update. Taking us back to December before the holiday, the Finance Advisory Committee received a presentation of the draft 5-year financial plan for the 5 years 2024 through 2028 on December 8th. And that same presentation was provided at a committee of the whole meeting to council on December 13th. That 5-year financial plan does include a proposed property tax levy increase of 9.5%. With the figures that we have early in the game at this point, we calculated that to have an impact of about $297 per year per property. We would like direction from council to take this draft budget forward for public consultation to get some public feedback on this plan. There is potentially an opportunity to have a couple of budget open house meetings, a more free form type of meeting where a presentation will be provided and the public is invited to ask questions, a very informal meeting where they can ask questions, get clarification, whatever is needed at that point. We do have the budget email address, and there will be all of the budget material made available on the municipal website for people to go and look at and familiarize themselves with. So today I am asking council to provide direction to go ahead and take this budget as presented at the committee of the whole on the 13th to the rest of the public as a consultation process.
Thank you. Can I have someone move the recommendation, please? Councillor Saunders?
I move that council direct staff to initiate a public consultation process for the 2024-2028 draft 5-year financial plan, which includes a proposed property tax increase of 9.5%. And that council direct staff to host 2 budget open house meetings, one on January the 18th at 1 to 2 p.m., the other on January 25th from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. And then council direct staff to include options for council consideration with regards to the use of $204,000 in climate action funds, as well as funding alternatives for a municipal share of the multi-use path extension non-ice compost project.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Wake. And to Councillor Morse for discussion, please.
Just a clarifying question. Will they be, the meetings are proposed to be held via Zoom, but will they be done via Zoom from council chambers? So if somebody wanted to attend in person, they could?
I believe that's the format that we had in prior years, yep.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Morse. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And that carries unanimously. Moving on to item 6.2, terms of reference for the official community plan steering committee. Thank you to our CFO.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I don't have a presentation for this item, but this is the OCP Steering Committee terms of reference that we discussed at a committee of the whole in December. So following that meeting, collected all the comments from council made at that meeting and circulated the draft. And that's the draft that is before you in the report in the agenda. So this would be a terms of reference to establish a steering committee for our OCP review update. And the recommendation for staff is to adopt the terms of reference for an OCP steering committee.
Thank you. And then just for the edification of council, if/when this passes, what is the process from here?
We will then start circulating like advertising for members, and then hopefully getting a good selection of applicants that we can bring to council for consideration of naming the committee. And then it would be meeting with the committee and the committee to essentially start to work on a work plan for the OCP. And I'll say too, like I saw that we had some public comment come in on the steering committee today, which I haven't had time to fully review, but I will say that this is the terms of reference for a committee. Council can amend it at a future meeting. So if, we're sort of looking for adoption, or at least sort of adoption, agreement that this is how we want to proceed, that we would start advertising for a committee. The council still has the ability to, amend the terms of reference at a future meeting.
Right. Right. And I believe the letter was, major thrust of the letter was centered around ensuring that there's no pecuniary interests. Rest assured to the public that it'll certainly be a consideration when council appoints members to the committee that it is a broad cross-section that isn't represented by conflicts of interest. Given that the discussion was fairly robust at the last meeting, I'll look to council for any questions or clarifying comments or interest in the document itself before I look for a motion to adopt the terms of reference. See none. Can I have a motion to adopt the terms of reference, please? Moved by Councillor Wake, seconded by Councillor Saunders. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Audio now and
Aye in favor.
Thank you, Councillor Jurgensen, and that carries unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Martin. Moving on to bylaw 7.1, loan authorization bylaw for the Eagle Cliff to Cove Bay Connection Project. We have our Director of Engineering, Patrick McGrane, joining us.
Council. So following up on the Eagle Cliff to Cove Bay Connection Project, which goes back a number of years. Some of you might recall, almost 2 years ago now, we applied for a grant, Investment in County Infrastructure Program, Environmental Quality Stream. That was the second grant application that we made for this project. The application was for a fairly comprehensive scope of work, which included a connection from the north end of the Cove Bay water system to the Eagle Cliff system, essentially to address concerns about reliable water quantity as well as water quality concerns. The grant application also included a new reservoir tank and some watering upgrade within the Eagle Cliff system. This end of summer of 2023, in August, we received partial approval for that grant program. Essentially, we received grant money, which is 73% funding for the Eagle Cliff to Cove Bay connection only. So there is a portion of the cost, the project cost, that has to be paid by the local service area, Eagle Cliff service area in this case. There are also some costs that aren't covered by the grant, including consulting costs for design and services during construction, as well as cost escalation from the time the assumed construction start to when we're actually likely to be starting construction later in 2024. Grant approval process was lengthy, but as I mentioned, it was at least it was a positive outcome. So the total amount that needs to be there's not enough funds and reserves to cover the local service area's share of the project. So there's a need to borrow up to $820,000. This is an amount that was reviewed with the Eagle Cliff Local Advisory Committee a couple of months ago, and they were in favor of that and approved that going forward. So that we have had that consultation with them. The borrowing amount would be reduced depending on, there are a number of properties in between Cove Bay Water System and the Eagle Cliff Water System that we know are interested in joining the combined municipal water system. And they would be contributing to the project and reducing the amount of the loan that has to be repaid by Eagle Cliff users. So we're still in the process of determining what that amount would be. There's going to need to be some communication with the potential participants in the project to confirm how many players we have. So it would be this loan authorization bylaw is for borrowing up to $820,000, which we see as being the maximum amount that would need to be borrowed by the local service area. Once the and so it's the reason why it's framed the way it is in the report, where it's rescinding a loan authorization bylaw and then amending it with the $820,000 is because back in February 2022, Council gave first 3 readings to the loan authorization bylaw with a different amount that was to support the grant application, essentially to show that, yes, we're committed to providing the funds. And here's the first 3 readings of the loan authorization bylaw. So we're looking for Council to provide first 3 readings of the updated loan authorization bylaw and to approve the next steps, which would be to obtain the assent of the residents in the local service area through a petition against process. So essentially putting out the question about money to be borrowed and giving residents the opportunity to vote against that. It's a more expedient and less costly process than doing a full referendum. And furthermore, the local service area or the local advisory committee was in favor of that approach when we met with them. So that's for the loan authorization bylaw part. In order to carry forward with the project, so design is underway. We're going to be getting to a point early this year where we're going to want to tender or move forward with construction in some other fashion. There are some other steps which are outlined in this report here. We need to essentially merge 2 water systems, the Cove Bay and Eagle Cliff water system. And so what's outlined here is a process where there would be a bylaw, a merger bylaw, which would merge the 2 systems, and then following up on that, there'd be an establishment bylaw for the new Cove Cliff water system, or whatever we want to call it. Grafton Lake water system might be a name that we would use. So those are still steps to come. What's addressed in this report here is the loan authorization bylaw portion of that process only. I should also mention, we did also review this with the Cove Bay Local Advisory Committee. So both LACs have been consulted and will continue to be consulted as we move through this process. So that's summary of where we're at and what we're looking for at this point. If there's any questions, you can address those.
See a couple online, so Councillor Wake to the speakers list, opening with Councillor Morse, please.
I think this is more a question for the corporate officer. I'm looking at the very last 2 pages of the staff report, which has the amended bylaw in it. And we're not reading the bylaw for a first time. Are we not rereading it for a first time? So it should say reread a first time, second time, and a third time? I mean,
We're recommending that the first 3 readings done in February 2022 be rescinded.
yeah.
And that the amended bylaw, with the different amount, the 820,000, be read the first 3 times.
Okay, well, that I totally understand that process. It's just the fact that it's already been read a first time. So there's nothing needs to be in those very last 3 lines of the new amended bylaw, something that's saying we're rereading this for a second or a reference to the rescission. That none of that needs to be there. It's a process question that you can deal with, later, but I just wanted to raise that. It just didn't seem quite right that there was no sort of trail in the bylaw itself of the rescission.
Right. I think the trail is in the council minutes. Unless there's a different way of approaching it for us.
It's a different bylaw, the one that's being read the first 3 times. So
It has the same number.
Councilor
Rescinding.
Yeah, so it's being rescinded, and then this is effectively a new bylaw. Councilor Fast.
Thank you. My questions are a little more technical. I'm congratulating staff for bringing forward a new bylaw that requires us to lower the amount of money collecting from the public. I think this is terrific. Well done on the grant, and that we don't need to borrow so much, and that properties are interested in contributing and joining. I was interested in that part. I'm wondering if in the second paragraph of the recommendation, whether staff would recommend including the words up to before the number 820,000, because I heard the director of engineering I heard Patrick say up to 820,000. And I know we've done that with a few other times when we wanted to make it clear and transparent to everybody that we might not even need to borrow that much. Should we include the words up to?
that would make sense to me.
Okay, thank you. Then I'm prepared to make the motion when it's time.
So let's just formally address that by unanimous consent then. Is there any objection to adding the words up to as per Councillor Fast's request?
Well, I could just add that in when I make the motion. Do you want me to read it out?
Sure, yes.
Okay. I move that council rescind first, second, and third reading of Bowen Island Municipality Loan Authorization Bylaw number 565, 2022. And that council amend bylaw 565, 2022 to authorize the borrowing of up to 820,000 to finance the Eagle Cliff and Cove Bay Water Systems Interconnection Project. That council give first, second, and third reading to Bowen Island Municipality Loan Authorization Bylaw 565, 2022 as amended, and that council direct staff to issue a notice of intent to the Eagle Cliff local service area under section 213 of the community charter, borrow funds to finance Eagle Cliff water system improvements subject to petition against, and to report back to council with the results. Over.
Is there a seconder?
I'll second that.
Seconded by Councillor Morris, and then a question from Councillor Diddy.
I guess it's along the lines of what Councillor Morris was raising. If we rescind something, then it's gone, it's dead. And then the next paragraph is we're amending it. And then we're giving first, second, and third reading to that amended. So there's a clunk in there in terms of the rescission. If we've got whatever the rest of the context is of that original bylaw and we're amending it to change the amount, perhaps we start with the second paragraph. Does that make sense?
The rescinding is of the readings, not of the bylaw.
So we're rescinding the readings of February 2022. And then we're amending the bylaw, the administrative bylaw, and then we're giving readings.
Thank you. Councillor Saunders and Councillor Wake.
Thank you. Just
Councillor Fast.
Just a real quick question. You indicated in your report that there were some other costs, consulting costs, cost escalation, whatnot, that weren't included in the grant funding as I understood it. So are they in the other 27% that the LSA has to take care of, or are they things that we have to address, or is it in the budget for this coming year, or what is it?
Well, it's part of, it has to be included in the project budget. So in the table on the second page of the staff report, I itemized estimated costs that fall under the borrowed funds column. And then we have the grant column, which is fixed. This is what they're approving, and this is what they're approving to pay us. So,
right, it's okay.
Yeah, so it's.
Yeah, I read that, I just didn't understand it when I read it. That accounts for it, thanks.
Councillor Wake?
Through the mayor, just so I understand this, we're just basically doing the first and most important step here, which is making the connection. When we do that, if we don't take the other two steps of the reservoir and the upgrades, is that going to cause any problem with people hooking up, or is everybody that wants to? Well, I guess everybody that's already hooked up to Eagle Cliff is now going to be hooked up.
Yes.
And then the people you mentioned that are in between would be the ones who would be paying a fee to hook up.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, sorry, one more question. In the map that's shown there, you don't show the Eagle Cliff water system yet, if I understand it right. I mean, it just goes as far as the end of Scarborough, really.
Which map are you referring to? Is there a map in the?
I guess maybe it was in the report. It was in the minutes because it was in the report the last time you brought it forward.
Okay.
But it was the one that showed the properties that were incorrectly identified.
Right. Yeah, that was dealing with a cleanup of the current Cove Bay water system. And so now there will be an amendment to expand the water system to include Gasola, Eagle Cliff, plus as yet undetermined number of properties additional to that in between the two systems.
Great, thank you.
And Councillor Fast, did you have your hand up earlier?
I just had it up. Thank you. To say, I wonder if that Councillor Wake is thinking of item 4.4, which we passed earlier in the meeting under the consent agenda. That was redoing the map, those housekeeping updates and the mapping, tidying up.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion on the motion, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And that carries unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Graham. And 7.2, the loan authorization bylaw for the Snug Cove sewer outflow replacement.
Okay, another authorization bylaw coming forward to council today. We've had this past summer a number of problems with the wastewater outfall. Repaired 3 times. The third time it was severely twisted and kinked. The portion was essentially unrepairable and it had to be cut off about 2/3 of the way to its former terminus. So it's currently discharging in Snug Cove as opposed to out past Jordan Point where it's supposed to be. So it is something that we're recommending given the problems we've had with the existing outfall and the age of it and its needs that it be replaced with a new outfall. Makes sense that we replace it with an outfall that can be operated by gravity discharge and can accommodate future load that we might be expecting on the system. The current outfall is substantially undersized for that, and it has to be operated as a force main. It has to be, all the wastewater has to be pumped. So we've had, a couple of years ago, we had the preliminary design report that Urban Systems prepared for the overall wastewater treatment plant upgrades. Part of that report included an environmental impact study and a preliminary design for a new outfall that consulting firm Great Pacific prepared. So we do have preliminary design and some cost estimates that are based on that, allowing for additional consulting costs and cost escalations. And so that's where the estimated 1.2 million cost for an outfall replacement comes from. And it is the vast majority of that is capital replacement. So essentially cost to be borne by the local service area, the Snug Cove sewer service area. There is a small portion, about $100,000, that relates to upsizing pipe for future growth. So that small portion could be recovered through latecomer fees from future growth in the system. But at this point, we don't have, or the Snug Cove sewer service area doesn't have reserves, and certainly not able to accommodate this kind of expenditure without borrowing the funds. So we need to authorize the borrowing of up to 1.2 million. The process following council giving first three readings to the loan authorization bylaw is the same as what we discussed for the Eagle Cliff loan authorization bylaw. We would have a petition against process within the local service area for the same reasons, the advantages of expediency and staff time and cost being substantially less than doing a referendum. So we would run through that process, and then we'd be in a position to carry on with the remaining steps of the project, which involve confirming the detailed design and proceeding with that, and then also confirming the permitting requirements for the project. We're assuming, based on our discussions with the province, who are aware of this, they have been informed, that we'll be able to, because we're not increasing the capacity of the wastewater treatment plant at this time, that we'll be able to pursue an amendment to our existing permit to discharge. We weren't able to get a 100% confirmation on that. So it is possible that we are, the province will require us to go forward with registration under the municipal wastewater regulation, which would be a substantially more involved and lengthy process. But we won't know that until we apply to the province for the amendment, which is a key next step forward with, once we've got approved funds in place. So that's what we're needing at this time. There was some discussion in this report about potentially consolidating with the existing loan amount that the service area, Snug Cove sewer service area, has to repay to the general fund. But as you can see, we're not recommending that. We're recommending a separate loan authorization bylaw for 1.2 million needed for the outfall. That's what we're looking for. It's a necessary project that we need the funds to move forward with, so that needs to be clarified. Do that now.
Councillor Getty, then Councillor Jurgensen, Councillor Wake, Saunders. Everybody's jumping in. Staff still has the floor. I saw our CAO had his hand up, so I'll just go to you first, Liam.
Okay, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Patrick, for the report. I just wanted to add one piece, which was responding to a question from the public comments earlier, which was about the discharge location is in deep water. Where it is located is around Dorman Point. It is actually, it's not in the cove. And so currently though, the pipe did have to be cut at a shorter length because of the state of the pipe. But I just want the public to be aware that when corrected and replaced, the discharge will be further out. It's not in Snug Cove, it is out past Dorman Point, and it is in deeper water. Don't know the exact depth, but we're into like, I believe it's 300-400 plus feet.
Thank you. Councillor Getty.
A million years ago, I was one of the lawyers that challenged the original permit and went to the Environmental Appeal Board. So at that moment in time, I was an expert on effluent. And I've forgotten much of it on purpose, but the original outflow was 300 feet and it was past Dorman Point, so that the tidal charts that they had it going into Dorman and not so much coming into Snug Cove. Some, but very little. But then the federal government built that cement dock, and so the flushing out of the cove was minimized. So whatever does come into Snug Cove then is trapped basically in the marina and has a very hard time flushing out again because that concrete barrier. So that's when it failed this summer. That's probably why so much of it is obvious within the marina. It's much harder to flush it out. Okay, so the 75 millimeter pipe was originally built for the first configuration of this, which was just the commercial strip down Government Road. And then the service area expanded to include Kate's Hill and the other down millers that very few of them have been connected and up by Rivendell. So the expansion to 250 millimeters, which is 2.5 times the original, is that, I'm not understanding if the 75 millimeter was sufficient to handle whatever expansion has occurred already to Kate's Hill and the few that have hooked up along Millers. Then the suggestion is to expand to 200 or 250 millimeters. The difference between the 200 and the 250 being $100,000. But what would that accommodate? I don't understand why there's that, the 250 millimeters is 3.5 times the size.
That would accommodate what we're projecting as the ultimate 40-year growth within the system. So it's what we didn't envision as being the most demand that we have.
The first question is the 75 millimeters, it failed, not necessarily because of the size, but because of the age of it and the condition of it. Is that correct?
Yes, I think there was the fact that it was being operated as a force main was a factor in that. At one point this summer, we saw the pipe, or a section of the pipe was at the surface. So the pressurized pipe wasn't being secured the way it was originally designed and constructed, and it was so essentially like fire hose. That created too much pressure and broke free from its moorings.
So it didn't function for the volume.
No, best practice for design of an outfall is to have a gravity discharge that doesn't have to be, so that you're not pumping every cubic meter of wastewater. So that's how it has to operate now. Pipe's not big enough to.
So it was originally set up to be gravity fed in terms of going from where the purification plant is down to 300 feet off of Dorman Point. That was going to be gravity fed with the addition of the pumps, right?
I believe the original intent was to have a gravity discharge line. I'm not sure at what point in the progression of the growth of the system that the pump station was added. I think it was fairly early on. It probably should have been constructed as a larger pipe to begin
Pressure
with.
at 300 feet was something that had to be counteracted as well. So I think it went in fairly early on, the pump station, but anyway. So I don't understand the difference between the 75 millimeter and the 200 millimeter. And I don't understand the difference in pricing. If it was, what the extent of the expense is for 2.5 times the size of the outflow pipe as opposed, and then we've pulled the additional cost for the 3.5 times, the 250 millimeter is an extra 100,000. So I would appreciate having a better understanding in terms of what the differentials are in those costs. But also, what do you think is the tipping point for the province in terms of, would it make a difference if it's a 250 millimeter for the province? Re-examining and having the much longer process for the permitting? What's the threshold for keeping us out of that process?
But I'm hopeful that it wouldn't have an impact because we're not actually upgrading the capacity of the plant. The capacity remains unchanged. We're just essentially future-proofing the outfall so that it could accommodate additional capacity in the future. And so we have to ask the question whether that could push us into a MWR registration requirement, and the answer was probably not, but wasn't conclusive.
Because at some point we do have to increase the capacity. We've got all those other places that are not allowed building permits now. So if this is a repair so that we can get the system functioning, as opposed to what we're going to have to do with the $7 million upgrade and increase in capacity for these other places along Millers and up at Rivendell, then is that increased capacity and that future use what pumps us into this more onerous permitting process?
It would be the increase in capacity of the system that would bump us into a more involved MWR registration process.
So we have to balance now between setting up the outflow that might be needed for that increased capacity, but not actually applying for the increased capacity because we can't afford to upgrade the plant.
Yes, so we'd be applying to amend our current permit to discharge, but we wouldn't be applying for MWR registration at this point unless the province came back and told us that we have to.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Getty. Councillor Jurgensen, you had your hand up.
I did, thank you. Through the chair to the director of engineering, just a question. I'm ignorant as to how these systems actually function, so forgive me if it's a stupid question, but is there any thought been given to returning some of the water that is right now going out as wastewater to have it be treated and put back into the system, as we are an island with finite water and frequently experiencing droughts? So just wondering if there's been a consideration of that at some point, and how that might be factored into this.
You're talking about reuse of treated wastewater?
Audio now unmuted. Correct.
Right. There was a while back, and it was in conjunction, I think, with the last upgrade of the wastewater plant. There was a component of that project that added some additional treatment capacity for that purpose. There are UV disinfection units in the at the plant currently, and there's a tank that's intended to be for reclaimed wastewater that would just be for water use around the plant, so that it would require additional potable water for washing things down and that sort of thing. It was never contemplated that that would go back into any kind of system. That is something that was envisioned, and I don't believe it was ever actually implemented. There were, I guess, other priorities. But that is something that we could do and probably should do at some point, is to get that water reuse system working the way it was envisioned.
Audio now unmuted.
Thank you, Councillor Jurgensen. Councillor Wake.
Thank you, through the mayor. I'm just wondering about the comments we heard from Mr. McDonald, and wondering if you have any awareness of any opportunity for DFO to help fund. Has that been looked into?
I'm not aware of any grant funding that would be available for this project. Certainly, if there is any opportunity, we'd be very interested. But I'm not aware of any available grant funding for typically capital replacement. So replacing aging infrastructure is difficult to find grant funding for. I'm not, certainly we're always on the lookout, but don't have any leads at this point.
One other technical question. I'm trying to envisage this pipe going into deep water, 300 feet or more, and being a gravity feed discharge. How does that, isn't there a lot of back pressure on the pipe, and that might have been why they had a pressurized system? Or does the pipe stay higher in the water?
No, the pipe would be down deep, and then the pressure on the pipe is essentially the water column above it, that 300 feet of water. But the plant is further up the hill, so it's higher than that. So you have the difference in elevation from the plant to essentially the water surface. That is your gravity head that would drive the discharge.
And that's enough head, you think? The plant is.
It is enough with, so our consultants tell us that it's enough with the larger pipe.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wake. Councillor Saunders.
Thank you, Mayor. Actually, the original questions I had were covered with the discussion with Councillor Getty, so I'll just skip right by that. But just in the 3 minutes here that Councillor Wake was discussing this, I went to the infrastructure GC site, and there is, and maybe there's not, maybe there's something, but there's a Clean Water and Wastewater Fund, $2 billion, and it specifically says target project rehabilitation of both water treatment distribution and existing wastewater and storm water treatment systems. So maybe we're not, I haven't got into this, see if we qualify, other than that we are a municipality, so that helps. But beyond that, it's certainly worth following up, I think, for us to just to see. So, it may not apply to us. I don't know, but it's right there right now. So,
to our CEO.
The CWWF was a 2017 program, and it had been fully allocated a few years ago.
Well, then I rescind my comment.
The next program that followed it was what's called the Environmental Quality Program, where we got funding for Eagle Cliff. But that fund has also been exhausted too.
Stop, I've rescinded it already, stop in the middle of the words.
But if there are funding programs that are out there that we're not aware of, we definitely want to know about them.
And I even just in the short conversation based on the public comments as well, I've sent a message to our MP, Patrick Wheeler, about potential funding programs, and given his background in environmental law, maybe there's something there.
Can I follow up on my original statement that all my questions were covered? And it's very much related to what Councillor Getty said. The increase in size from 75 to either 200, 250 millimeters seems to imply to me that we're going to be expanding the plant. We've already got capacity issues. So in order to utilize a 200 millimeter pipe, we have to expand the plant. So is there an expectation, like is one dependent on the other, I guess, is the question.
Well, not necessarily, except that, you wouldn't want to, if you're replacing the outfall, you want to make sure that it's going to be serviceable for whatever condition you might have in the future. And from what we're told by our consultants, that the preliminary design of this outfall, we asked them what size of pipe would we need under the current load to operate by gravity. And that was where that's 200 came.
Okay, that's good.
It's substantially larger than what is currently there.
Okay, thanks.
And Councillor Morse.
It was the size of the pipe issue. I mean, I think $100,000 is the difference in price between buying 1,000 meters of 75 mil versus buying 1,000 meters of 200 mil, right?
No, it's the difference between 200 and 250.
Okay, so you're going to go from 75 to 200 regardless, because that's not enough capacity in the pipe right now. So you want to turn it into gravity feed, which is going to save us operating money of not having to use a force feed. Okay, so the 100,000 is purely the difference between what it's going to cost for 250 versus 200 millimeters of pipe. And if we want to expand the system, the last thing we want to do is dig up and replace the pipe. So for $100,000, it makes sense to me to put in the 250.
Thank you, Councillor Morse. My question, I think I'm going to hold us just a single round here, unless there's anything really, really salient. And I'll go to Councillor Fast as the first time speaker.
Thank you, Mayor Leonard. I just wanted to say thank you, everybody, for the good questions and the good report. I used to be on the sewer committee in previous terms, so I've got some background with this, and I'd be prepared to make the motion whenever you're ready. I just wanted to say I'm in support. I'm not just lurking out here. Questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And my comments are, thank you to staff for the presentation. I note that the local area service committee is supportive of the recommendation to borrow. My questions, I suppose, are just curious as to internally the staff discussions around the long-term financial viability of the service area, given that we're doing this type of borrowing. It's going to have a significant impact as a parcel tax in the coming years, as well as knowing that down the road, there's going to be another very significant financial burden on the service area, given the need to expand capacity, and whether that's something that can even be borne by a service area of the size, and it, does it make sense to keep the I'm not saying that maybe I'm opening a can of worms, but I'm very concerned about the financial impact that the sewer system is going to have on this local service area long term, and whether it's going to be financially viable for property owners, and whether that's a conversation that's being had at the staff level and is being considered.
Yes, it's a conversation that we've been having and share your concerns. Where at this point we have a service that's set up to serve a certain number of users, and we're essentially stuck with making that work. In terms of the upcoming major expenditures to expand the plant, and that's where we get a little bit stuck in terms of the financing options. Is needing to look at future development, paying for those upgrades, and then you have a little bit of a chicken and egg type of scenario where that you need the upgrades before the development, and you don't have the money for development to pay for it. So,
right.
But there's also aging components of the existing plant. The asset management of the current facility would fall to what is a relatively small service area. And
similar to what we see in the water systems in other areas, right? Yeah.
So it's definitely a concern in that we're looking at a substantial parcel tax here for one component of the system. And it's it wouldn't be prudent to create any expectation that that's the end of the road in terms of what people have to pay to keep the service running.
I think that's what my question is, just trying to put into the public sphere and highlight generally that there's going to be more coming. The other question I have is related to the nature of the effluent that's being discharged. So we seem to hear repeatedly that the effluent has a significant odor, that it's potentially to the detriment of users in and around the marina. What is the quality of the effluent that's actually supposed to be discharged from the sewer system? And is that, my understanding is that it's not supposed to be odorous at all, or it's supposed to be relatively well treated.
It is, and so the reports of sewage smell don't really, it doesn't really make sense that would be coming from the treated effluent. It could be that when the pipe was essentially thrashing around, came off its moorings, that it stirred up some sediment at the bottom that released some of those types of smells into the Snug Cove area. That was really the only explanation I could come up with. But it's not, the effluent doesn't smell at all like raw sewage.
Right.
That shouldn't be something that you'd expect. It's treated effluent.
And so what does it look like for the municipalities, and do we monitor the quality of that effluent before it gets discharged to the pipe?
Yeah, so we have sampling requirements that have to be submitted to the province on a regular basis. We do test the effluent to make sure that we're compliant with the levels of BOD, biochemical oxygen demand, and TSS, suspended solids.
Okay, so the effluent is tested regularly for its quality. And so, have we investigated what the alternative explanations for smells in the cove are, or what could be the causes of that?
Well, there was the sediment at the bottom that I mentioned, or it could be, issues unrelated to the sewer outfall itself. I mean, there's lots of boats that could be leaking or discharging their own effluent into the Snug Cove area. There's lots of animals, geese. I'm not sure what to say, beyond that.
Right.
Mayor, if I may add to the engineer's comments, the treated effluent would, for all intents and purposes, be clear and odorless to achieve the treatment quality objectives of its BOD and TSS of 45 milligrams per liter. That's a pretty high test, and so it's pretty good quality effluent. So it shouldn't cause that, but Patrick and I have talked about it, and perhaps when the pipe was perforated or severed or discharging, it is disturbing potentially the sediment, which is perhaps has a sediment layer of anaerobic digestion, which would create that methane smell, that kind of gaseous kind of like decomposing smell. So it could be that the pipe itself is disturbing the seabed, which is causing that smell, but it's not the effluent itself.
Right.
But it's really hard to know with certainty what is causing that odor. And as Patrick has alluded to, there are many other potential sources of smell.
Press CMD. Thank you. I suppose from my perspective, I just wanted confirmation that that any insinuation that we're discharging effectively raw sewage into Howe Sound isn't factually correct. That's right. Okay, great. So it's been a long discussion. As per procedure bylaw, everybody's had a first round of conversation. The recommendation before us is to do the loan authorization. So I'll come back to you, Councillor Fast, to make the motion.
Thank you, Mayor Leonard. I move that whereas the estimated cost to replace the wastewater treatment plant outfall is approximately 1.2 million, therefore be it resolved that the Bowen Island Municipality Snug Cove Sewer Outfall Replacement Loan Authorization Bylaw number 626, 2024 be read a first, second, and third time. And be it further resolved that council direct staff to proceed with a notice of intent to the Snug Cove Sewer Local Service Area under section 213 of the Community Charter, borrow funds to replace sewer outfall, subject to petition against. Over.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Fast, seconded by Councillor Wake. Any discussion?
I have a question, which I should. In the previous motion where we were talking about Eagle Cliff, it was then a report back to council. And should those words be added to this one? Or is it just a given that we will get a report back, I guess is what I'm saying.
Look to the court pastor for advice.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. That would be helpful to add.
Any objection to adding the language to the end of the motion and to report back to council with the results? Seeing no objection, that amendment carries unanimously or by unanimous consent. So back to the main motion as amended. No further discussion. I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And that carries unanimously. Opposed? And opposed by Councillor Getty. Moving on to item 7.3, Bowen Island Municipality Land Opportunity Reserve Establishment Bylaw number 631. To Kristen Watson, our CFO.
Thank you, Mayor. Through the chair to the rest of council. I'm bringing forward today a new draft bylaw to replace our existing Land Opportunity Reserve Establishment bylaw. This is coming out of previous discussion with regards to any use of sale proceeds in the event that council were to decide to sell the fire hall. There was a motion, a recommendation that council would deposit those proceeds of sale into the fire, fire safety reserve fund, and those proceeds be used to, purchase new replacement equipment for use by the fire department. There was something that came up that our existing Land Opportunity Reserve Fund bylaw actually required that proceeds of sale of land went into that reserve fund. So I am bringing this bylaw back. I did a little quick review of it, and I did find some deficiencies in that original bylaw, and some of them being that it didn't cite the relevant legislative authority. It didn't provide for establishment of the Land Opportunity Reserve Fund, and it also didn't provide for an exception for tax sale land proceeds. So given the confusion sometimes that happens with amending a bylaw, I'm recommending that council simply repeals the original Land Opportunity Reserve Fund establishment bylaw and adopts a new replacement bylaw, which I've attached to this report. So this bylaw repeals the original. It addresses those deficiencies that I have identified, and it makes a contribution of proceeds of disposition of land and improvements to the Land Opportunity Reserve Fund to be optional. So this would enable council, should council go forward and sell the old fire hall site, then with this bylaw in place, council has the flexibility to deposit the proceeds of sale to that fire protection reserve fund instead. So it's just really a housekeeping bylaw to correct some deficiencies in the bylaw. So my advice to council, my recommendation to council is to repeal the original bylaw and replace it with this new bylaw 631.
Thank you. I'll look to council for a motion that Bowen Island Municipality that the Bowen Island Municipality Land Opportunity Reserve Establishment Bylaw number 631, 2024 be read a first, second, and third time. Is there a mover for that recommendation? Councillor Saunders, seconded by Councillor Getty. Any discussion on this item?
Yes.
Councillor Morse.
This minute I've done and got some. I'm not quite sure why the second whereas is so broad compared to the one that was in the previous bylaw. It's talking about the sale of lands and improvements to address strategic land decisions and repayment of debt whereas the first one had talking about the community charter and that we had to credit it to a reserve fund for the purpose of repayment of debt or for acquiring land improvements and other assets of a capital nature. So this new bylaw, if I'm reading it correctly, limits it to acquiring land only or debt repayment. So we couldn't buy a fire truck. It has to be just land.
I'm sorry, I'm confused, Councillor Morse. The new bylaw 631 in the first whereas states that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm reading them back. Yeah. Usually everybody else puts the old bylaw first and the new bylaw second. So I like your wording better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And that carries unanimously. Item 8.1, request to direction to proceed with the tender for Carter Road Bridge Replacement Project. We have the straightforward report and the recommendation here. The Director of Engineering is here to answer any questions. If there are questions, feel free. Otherwise, I will look for someone to move the recommendation, please. Comments?
Yeah, just something that I would like to point out that probably wasn't, may not have been clear in the report is we are essentially complete detailed design. A big driver for wanting to tender at the beginning of the year as opposed to waiting until financial plan and budget are all approved and we're getting into the summer is our own financial self-interest. If you tend to get higher prices if you tender right before summer and you want the work done right away in the summertime. Contractors' equipment is most valuable. Contractors, there's a lot of value for them to be able to bid on jobs, months in advance and then plan their work for the year, and particularly the busy summer period. So a lot of advantage. In addition to making sure that we're in place, that we're able to move forward in time frame when the school's out. Very much like to get the best prices possible for this project, which is a big chunk of our capital this year.
And it's already it's in the draft 5-year financial plan as it is, correct?
Right.
Councillor Morse for a question, followed by Councillor Getty.
I'm just wanting to clarify, is the bridge, a couple of questions, and I'll just do them one by one. Is the bridge going to be the same width as the existing bridge now?
Yes, same width.
And will it be able to carry heavier vehicles than it does now?
Yes, we'll be able to support school buses and any essentially highway rated loading would be able to support.
So it would, right now, the fire truck is not able to go across the bridge, correct?
That's right.
Okay, so you're doing it so that you can enable the fire truck to get across the bridge, not the school bus.
Well, we're doing it because the bridge is, the primary reason is the bridge is at the end of its life and needs to be replaced. In replacing the bridge, we're looking to accommodate all of the users that need to be accommodated, which includes emergency vehicles and school buses.
Okay, I guess if there's extra cost because of the school buses, I mean, the bridge was there before the school was built, so they knew that they wouldn't be able to get the school buses across. But if it's large, I'm guessing that the fire trucks are probably heavier than the school bus, so that's fine. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Morse. Councillor Getty, then Councillor Wick.
I don't have any difficulty with this motion and am prepared to move the recommendation based on this report. But I do have a question with respect to the 2 months, the expected 2 months that it's going to be, the bridge is going to be on a service, where we're suggesting that people use the unpaved Carter Road that comes up from the recycling depot. That's, I don't know, minimal quality, and I'm worried about the wear and tear on that. I don't know who or how or what, but is there some way that we can instigate some sort of a shuttle or carpooling or extra parking at the bottom, or some way of minimizing the traffic on that road? Because if it's, everybody starts using that instead of crossing the bridge and coming up on the paved portion, then I think we're gonna create more problems for replacing that road later. And we need that as a secondary outlet. I can't come up with who would do it, but has there been any thought put into that?
There's been some thought put into essentially putting up signage, advising people or potentially traffic light system that make sure you don't have two cars meeting each other head-on at the narrowest part of the road. We haven't sorted out exactly how that would work. One of the drivers for closing the bridge is essentially the cost what the cost of traffic control would be for the 2-month period, which is somewhere around $100,000.
Has there been a meeting of the people from Belterra and IPS and Chapel in terms of them coming up with some alternatives?
There hasn't been a meeting with groups now. Not a bad idea.
I'd be willing to do that.
Councilor Wick?
Will it be possible for pedestrian access during the construction? Because that would make quite a difference.
Yes, that's something that we can, I think we can include pedestrian access. That would be reasonable.
Tight rope.
Thank you. And Councilor Getty, I'd like to you to make the motion.
Okay. Whereas the 2024 financial plan includes funding to replace the Carter Road Bridge, and whereas the bridge replacement requires significant lead time to coordinate, will require a period of closure for up to 2 months. Therefore, be it resolved that council directs staff to obtain a detailed design and proceed with the construction tender process for Carter Road Bridge replacement, and be it further resolved that staff endeavor to schedule the work during the months of July and August to minimize the disruption to vehicle and pedestrian access to IPS, and reduce the number of cars which are required to access the property via the alternative unpaved Carter Road access.
Before that gets seconded, did you want to add the holding of a community information session?
Why don't we just do that informally?
Okay. So it's been moved. Seconded by Councilor Wake. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
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 And that carries unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Patrick. Item 8.2, short-term rental policy review. Report from Daniel Martin, our Manager of Planning and Development.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So I'm here today presenting the report on our short-term rental policy and provincial legislation implications. Okay, so by way of just brief overview, so 2019, we adopted our short-term rental policy, which envisioned permitting residential guest accommodation was the term used, which would permit the short-term rental of a complete dwelling for up to 120 days. And that policy was then provided in the business license bylaw and the land use bylaw in 2020. And then recently, this previous winter, fall 2023, the province adopted Bill 35, the Short-Term Rental Accommodation Act. And this act has a number of provisions, but most relevant for this report is that it restricts short-term rental accommodations except when it's a principal residence. And this applies to larger communities throughout British Columbia, The smaller communities may ask the province to opt in, and there's an annual deadline of March 31st each year for regulations to come into effect in November of the same year. So just by way, council's probably aware of this, but for anybody watching, so just an overview of how rentals work on Bowen Island. You have a property, you can rent the property as a long-term rental to a long-term tenant for a period more than 30 days. If it's less than 30 days, there are a couple different provisions in our land use bylaw. So the first being a bed and breakfast. So that's where somebody lives on the property and they run a home occupation. They rent bedrooms to overnight guests. The bedrooms or the units may have some limited kitchen facilities, but they're not a full dwelling. And you may have 4 or 5 of those on your property, depending on the size of the property. The second way that people may provide short-term rental on a residential property is something we call residential guest accommodation, and that's the renting of a complete dwelling on the property. So our land use bylaw restricts that to a maximum of 120 days per year. But otherwise, there are business license regulations, but there's not other restrictions on it. So if you own a property that has a house and a detached secondary suite or a attached secondary suite, they could both be available as a residential guest accommodation. And so then since we've permitted them in 2020, we've seen quite a substantial increase in the number of licensed bed and breakfasts and residential guest accommodations. But the timing of our policy adoption and bylaw adoption does make this comparison challenging given the effects of COVID as well. So it's hard to know, how much of this growth was after the policy adoption versus sort of recovery from COVID time. I also looked up today for comparison. This is from a company called Kamari, who we contract with that monitors short-term rental listings. And they do a similar listing. They have different numbers because they count listings differently than our business licensing does. But they show a similar growth, but again, with a similar caveat that it's hard to know if, without going back to like 2019, is this a U or is this a hockey stick graph? Makes it a little more challenging. And then what staff have done looking at, in light of the provincial requirements, is looking at the permitted or the licensed RGAs on Bowen, which would be impacted by the provincial requirements. And so, yeah, so that would, the provincial requirements are that there be a principal resident on the property. So it doesn't have to be in that dwelling, but so if you're making a detached secondary suite available, the principal resident could live in the detached secondary suite or in the main house as a resident in each dwelling. But so we found that for the best of our sort of estimation that there's 32 of the licensed RGAs that there is no principal resident associated with that property. All right, and then the report also looked at some comparable communities and to look at how do communities regulate short-term rentals, and the answer is it depends greatly. You can see here trying to even categorize them is quite challenging. So it ranges from they're just permitted outright in residential zones all the way to they're just not allowed. And sort of everything in between. The other sort of interesting note is communities that end up in this chart twice. So some places treat it differently if it is a principal resident or not. So for example, Gibson's, they permit it in a principal residence. So you live in a house, you can have it available as a short-term rental when you're not there up to a maximum number of days. And if it's not a principal residence, they only permit it if you acquire a temporary use permit from council. So they sort of have two streams for how to allow short-term rentals depending if somebody's living there full-time or not. This then is just looking at the actual text of that Bill 35 that the province adopted and just trying to highlight too that this idea that the provincial requirements would affect the property, that the property have a principal residence. So again, if you have a secondary suite or a detached secondary suite on the property that you reside in, that would still be an available option to have that available as a residential guest accommodation. Yeah, so it impact RGA units if there's no permanent resident on the property. And then just looking at that same chart of our rental options, it would impact those residential guest accommodations, but not bed and breakfast accommodation providers or commercial accommodation providers. And just so where we are, so we're here January 8th of 2024 with this report. And what staff recommend then is sort of a public notice process. So referral to two of our advisory committees, the Economic Development Committee and the Housing Advisory Committee, and then doing some work in terms of trying to gather public input. So even before this meeting, we've seen a number of letters come in, but looking to actually mail notice to essentially an island-wide mail drop and run an online survey. So we did the structure and rental policy work, conducted a survey, and have the responses from that. So we'd be looking to do a similar survey now that we're 4 years later and have had it in place and see what people's views are on short-term rental and then some questions that all aimed specifically at this provincial requirement. And then looking at hold open houses. So when we've done recent open houses, doing one in person and one virtual seemed to work well. and the goal coming back to council in March so that council has that information to make a determination about choosing whether or not to opt into this provincial requirement or whether not. And if the answer is not, then it may be that there are other changes still, or I guess either way, there may be other changes that we'd seek to see in the short-term rental policy or bylaws, sort of regardless of decision to opt in or not. And then I have just in gray on this timeline that if council decided to opt into the restrictions, they would come into effect in November. So the recommendation, council refer this report to the Housing Advisory Committee, the Community Economic Development Committee, into a public open house and seeking a recommendation on the decision to opt in.
Thank you. Councillor Morris, then Councillor Saunders.
A process question on the resolution. The presentation talked about a survey, and that's not mentioned in the resolution. And it also talked about a in-person and a Zoom open house. And we've only referenced a public open house. So I'm thinking we might need, and then the recommendation, and it says for a recommendation on the decision to opt into the provincial legislation. So are the public open houses and the surveys going to be designed to come up with questions saying, do you recommend or do you not, or do you agree with applying for or not? I mean, I don't quite know how. I can certainly understand where you would be asking the Housing Advisory Committee and the Economic Development Committee for a recommendation on whether or not to opt in, but I'm just not sure about how that would be structured for the public and the survey.
Councillor Morris, over to staff.
Sure, through the mayor. So, I mean, you're right. I think I'd craft the recommendation thinking that would be going to the two committees for the recommendation on the decision. So maybe that would go first and then to public open house at the end. And in terms of the wording of the open house, I've typically crafted the recommendation just to say a public open house and then have council leave it up to staff to determine that in fact, we should go beyond that. But if council wants to be more specific, then that would be acceptable as well.
Okay, and the survey? Do you need council authorization for doing a survey?
Through mayor and council, I don't believe I need authorization for the survey, but that would simply be staff sort of doing the work that's laid out in the report under the communication section. But if council wants to specify that, then you could as well.
Well, I definitely think a survey would be helpful, and whether we get to see the questions before they go out, it's my other concern. And can I ask one follow-up question, please? So when did we actually start doing business licensing?
Yeah, 2019.
Okay, so so that was sort of all around the starts of COVID happening. So I'm thinking that the lack of numbers in 2021 and so forth is probably largely just because, we had COVID and nobody's running a bed and breakfast or a guest accommodation of any kind. My other curiosity question is, how many commercial guest accommodation licenses do we have?
Through mayor and council, maybe it's one or two. I believe that some of the operators, they have a commercial business license, so it doesn't show up as a commercial guest accommodation business license.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. Over to Councillor Saunders.
Thank you, Mayor. I have some opinions on this, and I'm sure everybody else does as well, but given that the recommendation isn't to vote on this right now, but to move it to the committees and open houses and stuff, I'm prepared to move the recommendation as it is now.
My only comments before we move to a recommendation, just based on some of the letters and the conversations that are being generated in the community on this, I think it's important to remember, first of all, that there's no requirement that we opt in, but we're also at a place where the short-term rental policy as it stands now is up for review. And my understanding, a community member at the time when that policy first came in, was that it was never intended to be the be-all, end-all going forward into a decades policy that would exist for short-term rentals. I think we have the benefit now of a couple of years of operation. We have the benefit of getting some data, and part of the policy framework as it was established was that there would be a review period, which is what we're in. That review period coincides with what we've seen from the province, which is taking strong action, has made some strong decisions on housing in the province. It's consistent with what we're seeing from the federal government and their language on housing. And what this just leads to, I think, is a very good and robust time to have a conversation about what short-term vacation rentals look like on the island. What is it that the community wants to see? What is it that our residents want to see? What is it that our businesses want to see? And what is it that our operators want to see to take stock and make any changes? Ultimately, just to dispel any consternation in the community, our council right now doesn't have any decision or doesn't have any opinion on the matter. That's why we're looking to go to public engagement and seek public comment on this to say, how is this working? What have we seen? And what is it that we want to do? Is opting into the provincial legislation the best way to go with its principal residence requirement? And that's important to remember as well. The province is not looking to ban short-term rentals across the board. The major change that would impact Bowen Island with the provincial legislation is the ability to opt into some enforcement and data tools, but also it would impose a principal residence requirement for any residential guest accommodations on Bowen Island. And maybe that doesn't work for Bowen. Maybe it's a tweak of our existing policy, or maybe our existing policy is fine. But I believe that that's what we'd like to hear from the community and the conversation that we'd like to have with the community, because we know for a fact that short-term vacation rentals impact housing. To what degree and what direction the community wants to go in, that's what's up for debate. Councillor Fast and Councillor Getty.
Thank you, everybody. I just wanted to, with the comments, it made me look at the, besides the idea of flipping the recommendation so that the, for a recommendation on the decision comes before the bit about the open house. I wondered if it should say for a recommendation on the decision whether to opt in, or something that doesn't imply that the decision has been made, so that everybody can speak freely and we're clear that we're asking for genuine input.
Right. My recommendation would be that it read something along the lines of at a public open house and survey to inform council's decision to opt into the provincial legislation or not.
Or not. Good, thanks.
Councillor Getty, then Councillor Wake.
I just wanted to let the planner know that I thought this was a really good report. It's very, very thorough and helpful. And, I think that will inform a lot of the conversation that again, that will be very helpful.
Councillor Getty, Councillor Wake.
Thank you, Mayor Leonard. I wanted to, actually, first I'd like to echo Councillor Getty's comment. This was an excellent report. It really helped frame the situation. And I think there is, actually, before I get into this, even though we're not making any decision today, when we do come to having a vote on it, I just want to declare that I do have a bed and breakfast, and potentially it might be seen as a conflict of interest for me to be involved in the discussion. But as I understand it, if we are going to make changes as the province suggested or otherwise, it will only be to the residential guest accommodation. And so as such, I don't think I have a conflict. I just wanted to get that out on the table. And then as far, one of the things that I'm picking up on in the letters we're getting is a sense that none of this residential guest accommodation could possibly work as a long-term rental. And I think, I hope the discussion in the survey and at the open house is robust enough to look at some of the options. Because for decades, a lot of these places have worked as long-term rentals. It has, defrayed their costs. And long-term rental doesn't necessarily mean 12 months of the year. It can be 6 months of the year. And that would really help our business community. So in a lot of letters, they're suggesting, well, business is going to hurt on Bowen if we don't have these. Well, business is also going to hurt if we don't have housing for the employees for those businesses. And many of those businesses would be interested in renting, especially some of these larger houses with 3 or 4 bedrooms for their staff. And that might be quite attractive to the owner in that it would be a responsible business that would be leasing them and then subletting to the bedrooms to their staff. So just some thoughts to include in the discussion moving forward.
Thank you, Councillor Wake. And I know that many of us around this table do have thoughts. I think we'll leave it for the Housing Advisory Committee, take in what comes in from the public, and then I know that this is going to come back to us again in a couple of months, and I'll commit to creating time on our agenda that at the council level we can have the robust conversation as to what does this policy look like moving forward, whether we opt in, opt out, make changes, don't make changes. But it is up for review, and that's where we're at. Okay. I note that the corporate officer has put language for a revised recommendation on the screen here. Councillor Getty?
Whether or not to opt into the provincial legislation?
I think we need on in front of whether as well. Council's decision on whether or not to opt in. Yeah.
Okay. And also suggest adding, including in the last paragraph, including 1 or more public open houses and surveys. Between that covers all of our discussion.
Yeah. Like.
So the, just for the sake of people online and in the room, the amended recommendation reads, the council refer the short-term rental policy review report dated December 19th, 2023, the Housing Advisory Committee and the Community Economic Development Committee for a recommendation to inform council's decision on whether or not to opt into the provincial legislation, and that council directs staff to undertake public engagement, including 1 or more public open houses and surveys. Councillor Fast?
Could we say which policy it is, the provincial legislation bill, whatever it is, just for future years? So we, I'm sorry, I don't have the number of that.
35. Bill 55.
It is Bill
4.
There's a whole bunch of them at once.
Thank you. I can see Bill 34 is up there. That's great. It just helps us find it later.
That's 35.
Bill 35.
35.
Thanks. And I'd be happy to make the motion.
Okay, so Councillor Fast, moving as read. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Getty. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And that carries unanimously. Item 8.3, development and building fee review. Daniel Martin, Manager Planning and Development. Any comments on this at all, or questions okay?
Questions are fine.
Questions are okay. Any questions for the planner on the report in 8.3? Councillor Morse.
It's just, we're referring it to the Finance Advisory Committee for a recommendation, which I'm quite happy with. And then the next resolution says, the next paragraph says that council directs staff to draft amendments to the bylaws to enact the fee amendments in this report. So it sort of doesn't look like any comments from the Finance Committee would be relevant because, so I don't know whether it should be the first section is that council directs, refers as is, and then say that council directs staff to draft amendments to the bylaw after the Finance Committee review to enact the fee amendments, period.
Through the mayor, I would be happy with that. I'm trying to avoid essentially coming back with the FAC comments for then seeking direction to draft the bylaw. So trying to save one meeting.
Right.
And I think the FAC just wants to have comfort in the process followed. So I'm happy to move the amended recommendation.
I have a question.
Councilor Fast?
In the second part of the recommendation says in this report dated December 11th, but this date is December 13th. Does that need to be amended? Or am I thinking about a different report?
You have the correct report from what I see on my agenda.
Okay.
That is correct. I clearly updated the report 2 days after writing the recommendation.
Okay, so maybe the second last word should read 13th, right?
Right, unless Councilor Morris is just seeking to move the first.
I wasn't going to include the reference to the report. I was going to put the report reference in the first paragraph. The council refer the report dated blah to the Finance Advisory Committee for a recommendation, and the council directs staff to draft amendments subject to, what did I say beforehand? To draft amendment bylaws to enact the fee amendments subject to comments from the Finance Committee.
So if I'm hearing that correctly, it's a motion that council refer this report to the Finance Advisory Committee for recommendation, and that council directs staff to draft amendment bylaws to enact the fee amendments in this report dated December 13th, 2023. Subject.
I was going to say the council refer the report dated December 13th, 2023 to the Finance Advisory Committee for review and recommendation, and the council directs staff to draft amendment bylaws subject to comments from the Finance Advisory Committee, period.
Okay, subject. Okay. We take that as moved.
I'll move that.
Councilor Morse, seconded by Councilor Getty. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, and that carries unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to 8.4, update from our Chief Administrative Officer.
Thank you, Mayor. Since we had some capital updates in this meeting, I'll just focus on the community center. There was work that carried on through the break. And, you know, right now there seem to be tracking on schedule with the most recent updated schedule, which has the projected completion at the end of March of this year. And there is a lot of focus on everybody's end right now on getting the roof on, as I'm sure there's a lot of concern out there about that. I know there has been a lot of concern, at least I know there has been on our end since the summer. So we had a discussion about that today. So we're hoping that we'll have some clear action on that. And I know there was some discussion over the holiday as well in the community about the roof and the concerns around installing the roof over wet material. And I just want everybody to be assured that there is a third-party roofing qualified professional that will assess the current status of the membrane and the insulation underneath prior to the roof material going, the solid roofing material going on, and that it will not be placed on if that membrane or the insulation is compromised. And so that we've had reports from that third-party consultant previously, and I've been impressed with those reports. So I'm confident that when the roof does go on, it'll go on properly, and it'll go on over dry and intact membrane. So I'll be very happy when the roof goes on, that's for sure. And I don't have any other capital project updates for anyone. I did want to just touch briefly on the Anna Island composting as well. And just a reminder that this project will be a discussion point through the budget process as well. And in particular, we have the potential use of some of the climate action funds that are available to us for this project or the multi-use path or other projects. And so we'll be looking to input from the community as well as council about the use of those funds. So that will be coming back through the budget process. Just want to remind folks on that.
Thank you. Councillor Getty.
So I heard at the pub on Friday that the filters had shown up for the water treatment plant and that they would be installed and they should be tested very soon.
I don't know what you heard at the pub, but I cannot confirm or deny that.
Any other questions of the CAO on his update? Seeing none, thank you, Liam. We'll move on to new business in 11.1 update to council on Metro Vancouver business. So just like us, Metro Vancouver broke for December, and there was actually no board meeting in December. There was one scheduled that was canceled. So I anticipate that there will be a busy month at Metro. Of highlight to Bowen Island, the Regional Parks Committee meeting, the first of the year, is happening this Wednesday. There is a substantial report from Metro Vancouver on Cape Roger Curtis on that agenda, which includes a letter that they've sent to the municipality in mid-December. Regarding that letter, to anybody in the community that's following, it was in response to a request from council months ago, I think, for some sort of written response. So that is with staff right now. They are processing it and will craft a response. I don't anticipate anything coming to council on Cape Roger Curtis in the near future. There's nothing on my radar until that gets worked out at the staff level. Regarding TransLink is having a couple of meetings in the next couple of months. Oh, and also Metro Vancouver, I believe all council members have seen it, but there was an invitation to the Council of Councils meeting that Metro Vancouver is hosting. Any of our council members are free to attend. I believe that the topic of that meeting, which was originally scheduled last year or late last year, is around the Metro Vancouver budget and their financial plan. TransLink is in dire need of money and funding, which is taking up the bulk of the agenda at the TransLink table. There's an emergency meeting of the Mayor's Council next Thursday on the 18th, followed by a regular meeting the week after. But they are in budgetary timelines and constraints and financial planning as well, and that's the bulk of what's happening at TransLink. Any questions on either of those reports? I will turn it over then to our Islands trustees, starting with Trustee Getty, who's here in the room.
Okay, nothing since our last report, which was just after our December meeting. I've been building up the agenda for the next governance committee, which is January 15th. So that's upcoming, and I don't think there's anything else on the agenda that has any relevance to Bowen, although I'm going to follow up on figuring out what the other islands in the trust were that the delegation was talking about today. So nothing much happening over break since the last report.
Thank you. And over to you, Trustee Fast.
Thank you. I'll just add a couple of things. One of them is that you might remember at the last meeting in December, we had a delegation from Dr. William Schulba, who was the freshwater specialist for the Islands Trust. And there's going to be a couple of webinars coming up, one about freshwater, which the freshwater strategy, Islands Trust wide. And I think that's the one that is January 24th, Zoom meeting in the evening, and or Zoom webinar, I guess. And then there'll be another one about groundwater coming up in February. So these are things that all islanders might be interested in, and we can publish them in the, I'll make sure that Sophie gets them for the next agendas, and then they can be publicized. Water being of big interest once it stops snowing and we start to look forward to spring and another drought, wildfire concerns. People might be quite interested. I just wanted to point you to 12.7 in the agenda is the legislative monitoring report from the previous Trust Council agenda. So this is just kind of a heads up on what provincial and federal kind of changes are coming that might impact Bowen and other islands. And if you just click on that report and do a search for the term Bowen, you'll get 14 matches. So you can kind of see that they're thinking about Bowen in there, everything from old growth to the short-term vacation rental item that we just dealt with, and more ocean-related things. And today we got the official news that CAO Russ Hotzenpeller will be retiring. And so sometime this year, there will be a new CAO of the Islands Trust. He's been with the Islands Trust for 7 years, which, as he put it, is twice the usual lifespan of a CAO. So with that, I'd just like to also congratulate our current CAO, Liam, for sticking with us that long. Thank you.
Trustee
Not
Fast?
that long yet, yes. I hope it lasts.
And my only question related to Islands Trust might not be a trustee question, it might be a staff question. I know prior to Christmas, we were discussing the tax requisition from the trust. It was significant, it was large, and I know that there was some discussion that we were expecting to receive some documentation or rationale around that as per a protocol agreement. Has that happened?
I got it on December 31st from the treasurer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I look forward to reviewing that as part of our budget process.
Okay.
Great, thank you. With that, we are on question period. Are there any members of the public online looking to ask questions? I see none in the room. Out of all the throngs of people that have stayed till the end.
Yes, I have a question.
Bonjour, madame. Yes, so you have the opportunity to ask follow-up questions relating to an item discussed at the meeting. They must relate to an item on the agenda and limited to 2 questions and not exceed 3 minutes.
It's not a question. It is a comment to the presentation regarding the Japanese involvement and the Bridal Falls planning. If I understood properly, planning for a bridge at a planned bridge at Bridal Falls. And since I'm a member of the Bowen Island Fish and Wildlife Club, I would like to point out that Bridal Fall is a fish ladder, and that fish ladder, not only it's an important fish ladder, but it is in the process of, it's going to be renovated. So whatever planning of a bridge or whatever landscaping in that area should take that fish ladder into consideration. And I think the people, you mentioned committees that will be informed. I think that the hatchery and the Bowen Island Fish and Wildlife Club should be on that list. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. And just to comment on that, on my understanding, based on the discussions that we had today, so myself and Councillor Getty and the chair of the Heritage Commission were out at that site with the Japanese Canadian Legacy Society, as well as members of the Museum and Archives. And just to be clear, because it's Metro Vancouver's land, they would ultimately need to be part of the project champions for something like this, or if it comes through Museum and Archives. Historically, it was a bridge. There was some discussion that a bridge might not be suitable there anymore because it would be a bridge basically to private property, I think. So there was a discussion as to whether it could just be some kind of lookout or platform, or I'm not sure. So the conversations are very initial. I would expect to be kept in the, I would hope to be kept in the loop by Metro Vancouver as discussions go on with a project like that, but it's at very initial stages. And I know that Metro Vancouver would be very, very sensitive to the fish ladder and the salmon wildlife in that area.
It's just that to include that, the club in all those discussions, because we do look after that fish ladder, and DFO is involved and wants to renovate that fish ladder. So I think they should be included in all the discussions, or at least informed of the discussions.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Thank you for highlighting that. You're welcome. And with that, I will look for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Getty, seconded by Councillor Saunders. Any discussion? No?
Want to adjourn?
I will call the question. All in favor of adjournment, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
And we are adjourned.